Well, over the past week alone, South Africa has experienced incidents of sporadic mass shootings in public or at public establishments. Last week, 22 people were killed in taverns in Soweto, Katlehong and Sweetwaters in Pietermaritzburg. And just yesterday, 7 bodies with gunshot wounds were found on a Free State farm. For more on the spike in the country's gun violence, we speak to Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo. She joins us now via video link. Annah, thank you so much for joining us this morning. 22 people killed in taverns last week across the country. We now have the shootings that we saw happening in Alex, recent killings taking place on a farm in the Free State. I think for a lot of South Africans who are trying to make sense of these sporadic mass shootings, the question is this just evidence of our high crime levels, or is it evidence of a violent nature that we need to have a conversation about?
Thank you. When we look at what has been happening in South Africa, going as far back as July 2021, coming to now, we see violence, the normalization of violence. So this violence is not new. We have seen violence in South Africa, and some of our studies as the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation as far back as 2009 and 2011 point to the fact that violence is normalized in South Africa. We see a lot of violence stemming up, different forms of violence, from your collective violence, violence committed through criminality. We are seeing violent crime in South Africa. The spate of what has happened in the past week, from Pietermaritzburg to Soweto to what happened in Alexandra recently, we are seeing this spate of violence. But in order to address this violence, we have to understand that the criminal justice system alone is not enough to address what we are seeing, the normalization of violence, the emergence of violence in South Africa. We need a multi-pronged approach to address this violence. We need to go to the root causes of this violence. We need to look at the fuelers and the triggers of this violence and address it using this multi-pronged approach. So when we start going into this very architecture of violence, that's when we can start peeling off the layers from your root causes to your fuelers and triggers of this violence. So quite a number of issues are at the root of this violence that we are seeing as fuelers, as triggers. So, for instance, the socioeconomic situation in the country, when you couple that with the COVID-19 impacts, the high levels of unemployment, the desperation that we have in society, the frustration that many people have because of the situation that we are in, through some of the socioeconomic challenges, as well as the fact that the violence has been normalized. We haven't broken away from the past. We haven't addressed some of the traumas that stem from our violent, brutal past during apartheid in South Africa. So when we start putting all these different issues together and addressing the very root cause of violence and the violent nature that we see in society, in our communities, then we can start unraveling and unpacking what really is the issue. So the criminal justice system alone is really not alone. We can arrest people, but as we have seen in the past few weeks, there will be others who will be committing the very same crimes using the very same methodology as we have seen now in the taverns, and now we are seeing the criminality. So there is a number of issues, and of course issues of gun control are also important as well. To put measures in place to ensure that issues of gun control, particularly unlicensed firearms, are also controlled to some extent. Perhaps we need to have some form of a strategy that compels people to come forward and voluntarily give up some of the arms that they have.
Right.
Part of the strategy that was implemented by the government a few years ago, where people were encouraged to come forward and submit and just hand in some of their firearms that they have, because again, all of these issues are coming to the fore, and we are seeing guns being used a lot, particularly in the few incidents that we have had in the country in the past week.
Right. Well, Annah, you've mentioned that what we need to address the root causes of the violence we're seeing is a multi pronged approach. Now, just to give you an example of some of the state responses that we've seen this week in terms of the violence, City of Johannesburg Mayor Paul Palatse has ramped up police visibility in the city itself. I know that there's an addition of Metro Police officers that are to be stationed and deployed across the city. So we're seeing efforts here at increasing police visibility. Outside of a strategy like that, how does a city mayor address issues of unemployment, poverty, long-standing socioeconomic issues like that, to the extent that we can feel comfortable enough to say that we are, trying at least to curb these rising crime levels?
What is important as well, in addition to police visibility, is leadership visibility as well in communities, where leaders go down to where the people are, addressing them, highlighting what some of the strategies they're putting in place are towards keeping some of these socioeconomic ills in society, high levels of unemployment, the desperation, just the needs that people have in communities. So that visibility, that presence of leaders is very important, assuring people, letting them know what the government is doing, at what stage some of these strategies are at, so that people are also informed of what is happening. They can see that the government is doing something towards addressing some of these issues. For instance, just recently we saw the 350 grant being rolled out, but a number of people, the majority of people were excluded, for instance. That could have been a lifeline to a number of people. So with what happened with COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, that is still with us. And what we are seeing as well with the electricity issue, where most small businesses cannot break even because of the power cuts. They cannot afford to remain open during load shedding. So this also fuels issues of desperation, issues of unemployment, issues of having a country spiral into issues of insecurity, be it food insecurity, economic insecurity, etc. But we also need to really go to the root of the issue. We are not seeing violence in South Africa for the first time. It has been happening for a long time. So we really need to start having dialogues that are geared at getting to the root cause. Why are we violent? Why are we seeing so many states of violence in the country? What needs to shift? What needs to be done so that community members also become part and parcel of the strategies, designing strategies that are addressed at curbing violence, addressing violence, preventing violence in society. For instance, I think just in the news, there was a lot of lamentation in the past week about the fact that since July 2021 violence, very few people have been arrested. Not much has been done. The communities that were affected are still in dire need of support. So some of these issues also need to be addressed, but we really need the presence of leadership to update the nation, to update community members on what is happening, what has been done, so that collectively communities are also in the know of what is happening, and they can also assist where they need to assist in order to really address the issues of violence in the country.
I mean, you've mentioned that some of these socioeconomic challenges, these pervasive problems, have been around for a very long time. And in fact, there's been a sort of a foreshadowing of another similar unrest occurring if issues of a discontent citizenry go on without being addressed. But in terms of immediate action, Anna, what can be done in the now to try and curb these rising levels of crime? There have been suggestions around tighter gun laws, tighter gun controls. We know that we have an issue in this country with unlicensed firearms being able to circulate to the degree that they are. So there have been calls for the police to do more in terms of that. Because in a lot of the shootings that we have seen in the last couple of weeks, in fact, it has been the utilization of unlicensed firearms. Is that another avenue that can be explored to try and sort of, arrest this problem that we're seeing?
Indeed, it is. Tighter gun laws are good. The criminal justice system, the visibility of police is good as a rapid response to what has been happening, responding to the issues and ensuring that at least on that front there is something happening. But there is also a need as well in the interim to start dialoguing with communities. So we really need to start seeing these dialogues. We need to start addressing these issues, and leadership is really key. The leadership I spoke about, we have leaders in the local communities. We have our local ward councillors. We have our mayors in cities. We have, for instance, the provincial government. So we need to start seeing them addressing people. We need to start having some endeavors that really aim to get to the root of the problem and getting to understand communities and what the issues in communities are, particularly some of the communities that have emerged as hotspots with the violence that has taken place in the past week. So we really need to start seeing leaders, again, being visible in these communities to really speak to the people and address the issues and updating the people on what is happening. In most instances,
Anna, unfortunately, I have to interject. We have run out of time. I'm so sorry to interrupt your train of thought there, but we have run out of time. But thank you so much for joining us on the Weekend Report this morning, helping us to make sense of some of the senseless killings that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks. That was Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo-Tupeka.